Good afternoon, everyone. And welcome to this workshop. How are you guys enjoying Hackcon 5 so far? Yeah, I'm excited to be here. I hope you are too. And I'm excited to be here talking about Hackathon sponsorship today. So my first piece of advice with sponsorship is to turn your clicker on before you start clicking. My name is Irfaan Khalid. My pronouns are he, him, his. I identify as male. And I love hackathon organizing, but I especially love hackathon sponsorship. Here's some quick facts about me. I'm an organizer for Vandy Hacks at Vanderbilt University down in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm a public speaker, a photographer, a sneakerhead, and the occasional rapper. If you were at Hackcon last year, you probably saw me rapping on stage. That will not be happening in this workshop, but wait until tomorrow, just see. And I dressed up as a squirrel at Vandy Hacks 3 last November. I know you guys want to see a picture of that probably. I promise you it will be later in the slides. Here's some stats from Vandy Hacks 3 last fall. We had a $63,800 total budget thanks to our 11 corporate sponsors, and this allowed us to support 441 hackers. And because I promised it, here's the picture of me in a squirrel costume with my friend Daisy co-emceeing with me. Give her a shout out here. And yeah, I don't know why I purchased that costume, but it was a good idea in the end. Hackathon sponsorship is all about finding great companies to support your event and be a part of your event. So let's go over a quick overview of what hackathon sponsorship looks like. First, you have to ideate. You have to figure out what your budget is and know what your end goal when you get to your event is going to be. And once you've done that, you can start thinking of the companies that you want to have at your event. Think of the huge companies that you'd love to see headlining your event. Think of smaller local companies, startups that you think could also be a part of your event. Look at companies that you might have relationships through your school or your organizers if they work there. Any amount of companies can go on this list. For reference, at Vandy Hacks 3, or rather for Vandy Hacks 3, we had a list of about 600 companies we wanted to reach out to. We only hit 300 of them, but don't be afraid to add as many to the list as you'd like. And once you've done that, you can begin networking, and this is really critical. Start thinking about all the connections you have, start building new connections, use tools like LinkedIn to network, do everything you can to network, and utilize that network as you begin reaching out to companies and pitching your event, pitching sponsorship to these representatives at these companies. And once you've done that, you get on the phone with them after your initial emails, you sell your event, and finally, you seal the deal, you get money in the bank, and then you're able to host a great event thanks to your amazing corporate sponsors. Let's review the workshop goals for this session before we begin the actual material. I'm going to be focusing on two main themes of Hackcon 5, the first of which is reinforcing our hackathon foundations. It's my opinion that the hackathon sponsorship process and your budget is going to be the backbone of your events. The money that you get from your sponsorship process will pay for everything else that you want to do. So today we're going to be focusing on making sure that we have solid foundations, that we have the budgets we want to be able to do all of the things we'd like to do. We're also going to be looking at Hackathon 2.0. This is the notion that we have amazing events in MLH, phenomenal events, but what is that next level? That's whatever you guys want to make it to be, but to make it happen, you probably need money to do it. So let's look at making our budgets next level so that everything else can follow suit. I would like to disclaim that this is not Sponsorship 101. If you are a beginner organizer, stay here, you will learn from this session, but this is more geared towards intermediate advanced organizers. And this is going to be talking about taking existing sponsorship processes and bringing them to that next level. That being said, there is another workshop on sponsorship tomorrow that's more geared towards beginners. It's a Sponsorship 101 session, so please attend that if you'd like to learn more about the grassroots parts of hackathon sponsorship. But let's get down to business. Quickly identify rough groups of 4 around you for group discussions throughout this. Feel free to ask questions during the talk. I'd be more than happy to answer them. But if we start running low on time during the talk, I'll ask you to hold off on questions until the end when we do an open Q&A. Sound good, everyone? Awesome. Bringing your budget to the next level. I have 10 tips and tricks I'd like to share with all of you to help optimize your sponsorship processes. And the first is to stay organized and to stay consistent. If you take away one thing from this workshop, let it be this. There's a reason this is the first thing I'd like to share with you. You can stay organized by keeping a central spreadsheet. Keep track of all the companies that you're interested in and your contacts at those companies. Make sure that you keep track of every contact you make with the company. Know when you reached out via email, know when you had a phone call with the company, and make this something that everybody on your team can access so everybody knows where you stand with a certain company. When it comes to all of this money, ideally you have a lot of money coming into your hackathon, and you probably have a lot of money coming out of your hackathon. Keep good books, know where this money is at all times, and be a good accountant. When it comes to staying consistent, establish a regular workflow. When it comes to initial cold emails to companies, I highly recommend shooting out emails on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The reason for this being, it generally tends to yield the best response rate. On Mondays, nobody really has time to go through everything in their inbox, and recruiters that you email will probably skip over your emails. On Friday, nobody really cares on Fridays. I don't care about my email on Friday. Wednesdays, I guess you could shoot out emails on Wednesdays, but Tuesdays and Thursdays are the prime times to be sending out emails. Make sure your emails land in a point of contact's inbox at 9 a.m. their time. As soon as they get into the office, you want it to be scheduled to get there right as they see it so that they're the most likely to read your email. And always remember that when it comes to consistency, it's always a team effort, which leads us to tip number 2. Remember, it's a team effort, both inside of your organization and out. Within your organization, make it fun. Send emails together, grab a box of pizza, sit down together, shoot out emails, throw ideas around, have a good time doing it, and utilize the rest of your team to make sure that you're having the best possible emails, that all of you have some level of input on it, and maximize the chances that you'll get a good response. Outside of your organization, network with other organizers. That's what an event like Hackcon is all about. Like Swift said in his keynote today, we are all stronger as a whole than we could ever dream of being individually. Swap strategies, share contacts if you're comfortable doing that. Make sure that the MLH community as a whole is good at sponsorship. By feeding the other organizations within MLH, they will feed you back, and ultimately we can all grow and truly bring our budgets to the next level. My third tip involves me saying this word 3 times, network, network, network. And I say this 3 times because it's super important to build a great network. Talk to people at career fairs, talk to recruiters at recruiting events. Make sure that you get their email addresses and reach out afterwards to tell them about your events and pitch sponsorship to them. Talk to other organizers, and if you go to their events, ask the organizers first before you try to talk to their sponsors, but if they're okay with it, poach away. Go for it. You're wearing a Crimson Hacks shirt. I'm friends with their organizers. I was able to get a sponsor at their event because I talked to their organizers and tried to see if they would be okay with me doing that. Also, nice shirt. And network with your school faculty. Build relationships that you can leverage to help you get great corporate sponsors. The faculty at your school probably have connections, whether that be in the Career Center or your computer science departments. Whatever it is, build that network within your school and use that to your advantage. Tip number 4 is to be smart with your budget. And you can begin doing this by knowing what your budget is before you start reaching out. Have an end goal in mind so that you know how much work you need to be putting forth and how consistent you need to be when it comes to actually doing the legwork. That being said, once you know what your budget is going to be, set reasonable tiers to help you get there. If you have, say, a $40,000 budget that you'd like for your event, don't try to set one tier that's $40,000 and have one sponsor. 1, nobody's going to bite, and 2, if somebody were to bite, it would be really weird to just have one sponsor at your event. Given the same hypothetical budget, if you wanted to have 40 companies each pay $1,000, sure, they're all going to pay $1,000, but you don't want to oversaturate your event with 40 different sponsors. Set tiers that are both enticing to companies, amounts that they're willing to pay, amounts that are reasonable for the perks that they get, but also set amounts that will help you get to your goal budget while having an appropriate number of sponsors. For reference, at Vandy Hacks 3 last year, we had 11 corporate sponsors, and given the space, it worked out. You do have to think about physical space limitations with how many sponsor tables you can have and how many are actually on site, how many are not, but be reasonable with it. I also recommend to every hackathon, please have a 10 to 15% emergency fund. MLH will be able to support you. I believe that's still a policy in case something goes wrong, but try not to get to that point. Have a 10 to 15% emergency fund in case something goes wrong. For example, at Vandy Hacks 3, you saw that we had 441 attendees. Well, we budgeted for food for 350. Somebody had to pay to feed all of those extra mouths, and that's where our emergency budget came in. Always be prepared. And finally, be proactive and plan for all the possible expenses that you could have throughout the year that all pertain to your event. It might not just be related to your event. It might be for things like Hackcon. This is something that can absolutely come out of your organization's budget. So make sure that you keep that in mind. Here's an example of what a budget might look like and some of the costs that you can expect to see. Say we had an $80,000 total budget. You can see that $20,000 is allocated to each of these categories: food, travel, and hacker experience. $8,000 is allocated as a 10% emergency fund. This is on the lower end of the range I said earlier, but 10% is totally fine. If you can't budge and you have more than that, go for it. $5,000 for Hackcon in case this organization wanted to send many people to Hackcon. $4,000 for venue and housekeeping, and this is one of the weaker points of the sample budget because this can be super variable. Know how much your venue is going to cost, know what your venue is going to be. This is one of the first things that you should establish in the hackathon organizing process because it's going to drive a lot of what your budget is going to look like. $2,500 for hack nights or other miscellaneous events throughout the year, and finally $500 for marketing. You can cut a lot of costs throughout this, but especially in marketing, because a lot of social media marketing is free. And if you want to do physical marketing, your school probably will provide you free flyers and things of that nature. But if you need some extra flyers, if you need to boost some posts on Instagram or Facebook, make sure that you have a small but reasonable budget to do so. We're now going to get into our first group discussion, so identify those groups of 4 around you and respond to the following prompt. What are some budgeting mistakes that you guys have made or seen other organizers make without naming names, and how do you think they could have been prevented? Take 1 or 2 minutes, talk about it, then we'll reconvene as a group and share our answers. Let's move on. Tip number 5, let your prospectus do the talking. Your prospectus is your document that tells sponsors about your event. It tells them what your sponsorship tiers are, how much they cost, what the perks they get are going to be. This is an important document. So to make sure that it really speaks volumes about your event and what you have to offer, ensure that 1, you have a great graphic designer, have eye-catching designs that are going to be memorable and pleasing to look at. In addition to that, include info and statistics about your past events to give yourself some clout. Let sponsors know that you have a good track record and that you have something to show for all the work you've done in the past. It'll make it that much more likely that they'll want to sponsor your next event. And finally, keep your sponsorship prospectus easy to read, clean and simple, and concise. Here's an example of what I consider to be a really good sponsorship prospectus, and guess what? It's the Vandy Hacks one. As you can see here, great, who was that? Thanks. As you can see, great graphics, eye-catching designs. In bold, you can see the text that's really critical to sponsors, statistics that are easily consumed via graphs that also pop. There's not too much text, it's easy to read, it's well delimited as paragraphs. On these pages, the tiers are easy to read, it's easy to figure out what goes with what. Question? This one on the bottom left is top participating schools outside of Vanderbilt, and this lets sponsors know what our target schools are. And on the bottom right is participant class distribution, so what year they are in school. As you can see, the grids look pretty clean, easy to read. And finally, we make it simple for sponsors to figure out anything they don't understand on the left side here by going to the right side and seeing our appendix. This is something I would highly recommend in a prospectus because every sponsorship prospectus is going to be a little different. Every hackathon's a bit different, and the perks, while they might be really similar, are a little nuanced. So make sure that the sponsors know exactly what they're going to get and make it simple for them. Don't make them have to reach out to you to ask about every question that they have, but put that information right there. All in all, this is clean, easy to read, and simple, but it's comprehensive. It gets the job done. So. So we opened that up to a bidding process this year because we wanted to see how many sponsors would actually be interested in our headline spot and see how much it was really worth. So that's why we did that this year. That was on our 4th event. We didn't put a minimum bid on here. I think that would be totally reasonable, and we verbally set that with sponsors, but that would be up to your discretion, I think, depending on how you want to approach the headline process. Yes?
What was the final bid amount?
I don't think I'm allowed to share that. Can you repeat your question?
How often are those tires the actual ones? Like, it's going to be like 5 2Ks, 2 4Ks, and 1 7K. Like, do you change prospectus with those, like, at the amounts?
With the amounts, it totally depends on the year. No, we don't. Yeah, the amounts have stayed the same for us for the last 2 years, but before that they were a bit lower and then we scaled up, and we don't discriminate on how many sponsors we want in each spot. Does that answer your question?
Kind of.
Ask in the Q&A afterwards. Yes?
So MLH suggests that each tier should exceed 1/3 of the final sponsor budget. So is it a strict rule, or can we just change it?
I'm familiar with that rule. I've never strictly abided by it, but we've happened to abide by it. I think it's a good rule, by all means. I've just never really thought about it, but I think that's a great idea. Just not to undersaturate your event and have one sponsor pay an incredible amount of money and the others not so much. And I saw another question here. Did you have a question?
I think one of my questions is how flexible, when you get sponsored, and how flexible is it with them? Like, are they going to take that exact package, or do you have any negotiating period of, like, we didn't really want that, but we wanted this for?
That is a really good question. What he asked was how flexible we are with the packages. And I suggest being as flexible as you need to be, but you probably don't need to be all that flexible. What I'm saying is, if a sponsor came up to me and said, I want the $4,000 package, but I want an extra perk, or I want to pay $3,000 and remove a perk, if it works for you, by all means do it. But if you're not comfortable with it, if you think that it might hurt your budget, if you really need that extra money, or you've already done it with a lot of companies and you don't want to continue doing it, by all means, you can say no. It's fair to negotiate. It's always a two-way process. On the lower end of it, I would be more flexible with it because you know you're working with smaller companies. A lot of sponsorship prospectuses have a startup tier, and that's something that I think is really cool. It's where you have a pretty small amount or even a negotiable amount specifically for startup companies, and that can be huge to get those companies involved in your event, and as they grow and as you grow, they can continue to be involved. So do consider the long-lasting effects of doing something like that. If you're flexible and it'll pay off in the long run, go for it.
Why did you opt not to?
Sorry?
Why did you opt not to?
Not to what?
Have the startup here.
That was a team-wide decision. I don't remember the exact factors, but we can talk offline about that if you'd like. Any other questions? Yes.
So how does the anonymous, or how does the bidding work? Is it anonymous or not? So if you have two people who want a title sponsor, do you let them know what the other bid is, or do you just tell them, like, that's not enough?
So the person that I asked about that is standing right next to you, but that's up to you. It's a tough question. It's hard to deal with so many companies and so much money at once. What ended up happening for us was only one company was actually interested in it, so we rolled with them. If you had multiple companies, I think there are several ways that you could do it, and I think that's something that we can talk offline about as well, because it's a pretty lengthy conversation. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, for sure. Yes?
So this is your current prospectus, correct?
This is the Vandy Hacks for sponsorship prospectus, yes.
So how much are you planning to scale? Because your last Vandy Hack was 441.
Yeah.
So you said you raised the prices because you wanted to scale. What is your target size with these numbers?
We scaled the prices from Vandy Hacks 2 to 3. And then from 3 to 4, the prices stayed the same except for our headline tier. As far as how we're scaling our event in terms of capacity this year, we're actually going down a bit. And the reason for that is simply space limitations. The venue that we use couldn't really comfortably support 441, so we're going for 400 this year. That being said, it's okay to scale your budget up as you grow as an event, because that means you can provide a higher quality event. Better swag, better food, more traveler reimbursements. Eventually you may get to a level where you can offer flight reimbursements, etc. Yes? The engineering and science building on our campus is pretty new. They work with us very well, and they were free, so I wouldn't say that we even considered other options. I don't know if anyone else has questions, but I think we're going to leave those for the Q&A at the end because we have been on this for a while. Oh, you guys had a lot of questions about this one. But let's move on for now, and if you have more questions, we can address it in the open Q&A. Tip number 6 is to utilize tools effectively. Google Drive is an amazing tool for collaboration. Use it to keep things like your master spreadsheet, in one place so that everyone on your team can work on it all at once and access it at any time they need to. LinkedIn is your friend. Use it to source cold leads that you want to reach out to. Use it to build your network and establish a network. And use tools like hunter.io to scrape LinkedIn for cold leads email addresses. If you, say, want GitHub to sponsor your hackathon, you might look up GitHub Technical Recruiter on LinkedIn. And sure, you can find somebody's profile, you can find a technical recruiter there that you might like to reach out to, but their email address might not be on there publicly. A tool like hunter.io will scrape their profile and generate what hunter.io thinks the email address is with a percentage of confidence that it believes that it gave you the correct result. And I've used similar tools. Hunter.io is the best far and away. Tools like PersistIQ aren't always that accurate or that good. Clearbit Connect is something else that you may have heard of that is actually pretty good, but not as good as hunter.io. Highly recommend.
Sponsors like that when you, like, are they okay with that? Because I feel like they would be kind of sketched out as like, how did you get this? It wasn't publicly available.
I wouldn't say they're not okay with it. I always start the emails where I find their leads cold on LinkedIn with, "Hi, I found your email on LinkedIn and blah, 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 blah." So as long as you preface it with that, it's totally okay.
Wait, if you didn't find it on LinkedIn, if you used hunter.io,
Hunter.io
guess your email address.
Hunter.io is a Chrome extension that scrapes a LinkedIn profile and generates the email address from that. How it works, I don't really know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
All right, cool. And finally, I would recommend having domain-specific email addresses, for example, Irfaan@vandyhacks.org, because it looks professional, it looks clean, and when I tell people that that's my email address, well, it's kind of badass, so highly recommend. Tip number 7 is to use your resources both at your school and within your communities. At your school, look for institutional sponsorships. Look for your School of Engineering or your Schools of Computer Science to help you out and sponsor your event. Last year, the Vanderbilt University School of Engineering was one of our major sponsors, and this was a huge help to our budget. Work with your career center. Build a solid relationship with them, because this works two ways. One, companies might reach out to your career center and ask how they can be more involved on campus, and you want to be the first thing that comes into their minds. Then they can redirect those companies to you, and it's all said and done. The other way around, you can talk to your career center and see what relationships they have with other companies and use that to your advantage. Leverage all of the recruiting potential that your school already has and just turn it into something that you can use to your advantage. When you're not directly interfacing with the career center, you can also just use your career center's website and look for email addresses, recruiter information for the companies that you know your school has relationships with. This was a huge help for us last year because companies that have relationships with your school are more likely to want to continue building those relationships and will be more likely to sponsor your events. And finally, like I said earlier, know the faculty at your school, know your professors of computer science, and use them to your advantage. Talk to them, see if they have connections to companies, and see if they can intro you to those companies. Within your communities, look for local companies. Local companies are more likely to be enthusiastic about sponsoring local events and building that community in your city. Look at local companies, look at local accelerators that are interested in the entrepreneurial aspects of your hackathon, and finally, look to local developers. If you attend local code meetups or dev meetups, talk to the developers there. See if they work for companies that might be interested in sponsoring you, see if they can intro you to somebody at those companies, and if not, well, you met a cool person that can maybe help out in other ways, such as mentoring people at your event. Tip number 8 is to be a salesman. We're pretty close to Scranton, Pennsylvania. Meet Jim Halpert. He lives in Scranton, or he used to, and he's a great salesman because he knows his audience. He caters to his clients' needs, and in this case, you, as the salesmen and saleswomen and the salespeople of the hackathon community, need to cater to your sponsors' needs. Know what they need, know what they can get out of your event, and be able to sell that to them. Know what your selling points are, and really pitch what you know you have to offer that can help them meet their bottom line. Throughout the sales process, you're going to do a few things. You're probably going to start with an initial email. Keep this clean, keep this concise, make it something that a recruiter can consume pretty easily, and make sure that statistics are right there, that they can see those pretty easily, they don't have to think too much, and really grab their attention with that. Because when you get to the phone call is really when you make the sales pitch. In your phone call, be personable, be friendly, and be ready to answer any questions that you know your sponsor might have. In other words, be prepared in general. Know what this company is about, know what you have to offer, and know what questions they might ask you. But you're not always going to know the answer to a question, and that's totally okay. If that happens, then just say, hey, I don't know right now, but I can look into it and I can follow up with you. And that leads to the follow-up stage. After a phone call with the company, I usually set a deadline of 2 weeks after the phone call for a company to give us a decision about whether or not they would like to sponsor Vandy Hacks. 2 weeks is a reasonable amount of time for a company to jump through the hoops and figure out if this is something they'd like to do, and it's not too long that you can't wait for them. So 2 weeks is what I would recommend. And in that 2 weeks, I suggest sending 2 to 3 emails. 3 is maybe a bit much, but if you really have the need to, go for it. But if you send 2 emails in that period, one should be your follow-up immediately after your call. Let them know any information that you said you would follow up on, thank them for their time, maybe include a quick overview of what you discussed, and then about a week later, follow up, make sure that they know that you're there in case they have any questions, and maybe they've already made a decision at that point. And just let the sponsor know you care by following up consistently. That's key to making sure that sponsors are comfortable with your event, know that you're professional, and will be willing to work with you moving forward. Let's move into another group discussion. What are some traits of good salespeople that you found useful in Hackathon sponsorship? Think about the things that you do with sponsors that you've seen other organizers do with sponsors, and the traits that you think really make them great at pitching to sponsors. Take a minute or two to discuss this with your groups, and then we'll reconvene. Great answers, great discussions. Let's move on to the next tip. Tip number 9 is to be flexible. Not every one of your sponsors is going to be able to sponsor you financially. So be open to in-kind sponsorships, which is when a company will sponsor you but with something physical. Food, prizes, swag, API keys, what have you. Take it. It's something that you don't have to pay for, and ultimately it helps you build a relationship with that company that you can use next year to perhaps get financial sponsorship from them. Namecheap didn't sponsor us financially last year, but they gave us stickers and t-shirts. I still wear that t-shirt pretty regularly, at least once a week. And it's a great t-shirt. Try to get one from Adam. Everybody bug him after this. Be open to in-kind sponsorships. Be flexible with your sponsors. And tip number 10 is to put on a good show. Before your event, be diligent and be proactive. 6 to 8 weeks before your event, send your sponsors logistics info, any information they need to know about flights, hotel bookings, etc. Make sure that they know what they need to do so they can spend more time focusing on recruiting, which is their bottom line, or exposing their brand, which also might be their bottom line. During your event, help them out. Make sure that you're friendly to your sponsors, give them what they need. By no means am I saying to kiss ass, but be there for them. Make sure that they can accomplish whatever it is that they're there to do. And at the end of your event, follow up with them, try to get feedback, because that's the only way that you're going to grow. I highly recommend paper exit surveys, and you're going to get pushback for this. People will complain that this isn't digital, especially because it's a tech event, but if you give people paper surveys to fill out at the end of your event, everything's fresh in their mind, and they're going to give you the survey back, and you can bug them right there because they're 3 feet away from you if they're not filling out the survey. If you try to send out a survey online via SurveyMonkey or Google Forms afterwards, then they're probably not going to respond, and you might not get great feedback. So I highly recommend paper exit surveys.
What about like gathering like the data from the paper surveys? How like is that pain worth the paper, or is like, 'cause like that's a lot of crap right there.
I would rather do the work to have data than risk not having any data at all.
You don't think they would, if like you gave them a link on their phone that same day instead to fill it out? Do you think they would be more opposed to that?
I think that could work. I think you still pose the risk of them saying, oh, I'll do it later, and it's hard to really argue with the sponsor, and then they end up not doing it.
But don't do that for hackers though? Would you say doing that for hackers is worth it? Like,
That is not my domain of expertise. I would say you can go, I wouldn't do paper exit surveys for hackers. That's way too many people is the thing. At Vandy Hacks 3, we had 11 sponsors, so it was 11 surveys. It's not that hard to deal with. And for reference, at Vandy Hacks 2, we gave out Google Form links to everyone. We had roughly 10 to 12 sponsors. We got 2 responses, and they barely said anything. It wasn't valuable feedback. There was no data to use, and we didn't even think about the data that we got. At Vandy Hacks 3, I handed out 11 paper exit surveys, and I got back 11 paper exit surveys with phenomenal feedback. That's really helping the team grow this year. So definitely recommend that for the sponsors. Did you have a question? Okay. And this is going to be our last group discussion. What questions do you guys think that you would want to ask on exit surveys to receive valuable feedback? Take a minute or two to discuss this, and then we'll reconvene. No? Well, we're running low on time, so, and you don't count, you're not a student. And those are my 10 tips and tricks to optimize your sponsorship processes. But what comes next? That wasn't exhaustive by any means. There's a lot more to learn. So if you go to one of these links, and I'll post these elsewhere later, I'll post them in the Slack, you can see a project that I've been working on for about a year, and it's not quite done, but it's getting there. My goal is to build one comprehensive sponsorship guide for all hackathon organizers around the world that contains detailed guides, templates, and examples for everything that you could possibly want to know about hackathon sponsorship. It's currently hosted on my GitHub, and some of it's there. This workshop's material is in there. I have to update it, but drafts are in there. And please feel free to use this, share it, and fork it when it's completed. I will be sending it out and circulating it through MLH because Shai said he would do that for me. And if you have any feedback or ideas that you'd like to give me, things that you want to see in that I may not have thought of, please feel free to reach out to me at irfaan@vandyhacks.org. We are going to not do an open Q&A here, but we'll do it outside instead.
Outside, or we can do it in Rebase, whatever's easier.
I'll be in Rebase afterwards, and we can answer any questions. Please pre-register for VandyHacks 4 at vandyhacks.org. Applications open on Monday. And thank you all so much for attending this workshop.